Welcome to Newsmakers Newsbreakers. From A, as in Susan B. Anthony, to Z, as in Susan Zarinski, President and Senior Executive Producer of CBS News. I'm Deborah Hughes, President and CEO of the National Susan B. Anthony Museum and House, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to our special guest tonight, who will engage in a casual conversation about their personal and professional connections as broadcast journalists. We appreciate their work to keep us informed and to help to write and record our history, an endeavor that we believe Susan B. Anthony herself, a journalist, would relate to and would endorse. From A to Z is the title of our annual Susan B. Anthony Birthday Celebration Gala this year. It will be virtual. WROC-TV, which is the Rochester CBS affiliate, has generously offered to air the gala on Channel 8 at 7 p.m. on next Wednesday, February 10th. I especially want to thank Wendy Bello, Vice President and General Manager of WROC, for producing our gala and this program we're bringing to our special guest tonight. Well, Susan Zarinski, known by her friends and colleagues as Z, will be the featured keynote speaker for the gala. Tonight, Z is joined by Norm Silverstein and Helene Biandutti-Hofer. The three of them have unique and interesting connections to each other, and we'll learn a little bit more about that shortly. Our conversation will go on for about an hour, and we'll save time at the end for a few questions submitted by our audience in advance. I'd like to introduce our guests now and then hand the show over to them. Susan Zarinski became president of CBS News in March of 2019. She is an acclaimed journalist, a groundbreaking executive producer, and she is the first woman ever to take the helm as president of a major broadcast network news operation. You can hear some of that glass ceiling. Z began her career with CBS News in Washington as a part-time desk assistant in the midst of the Washington Watergate scandal in 1972. At that time, she was at American University, where she and Norm were classmates. Since then, she's built her career producing award-winning programs and historic news stories. She's a role model, not only for women, but for everyone who is dedicated to journalistic excellence and ethics. We'll learn more about that tonight from Helene, who worked for Z as a CBS production assistant in New York. Thank you, Susan Zarinski, for being with us tonight and for your upcoming keynote speech next week. Norm Silverstein, as many of you know, is president and CEO of WXXI Public Media, one of New York's leading television, radio, and online digital facilities. WXXI operates 4 public television channels and a cable channel, 6 public radio stations from Rochester to Ithaca, the historic Little Theater, and City newspaper. WXXI produces the national public television series Second Opinion, seen on more than 200 stations nationwide. By coincidence, Norm began his career as a part-time assistant producer at WTOP, the CBS all-news radio station in Washington, also while still a student at American University during the Watergate scandal. As journalism students at AU, Norm and Z had the same mentor, Ed Bliss Jr., who worked with Edward R. Murrow, Cronkite, and others who shaped the news media as we know it today. Thank you, Norm, and Jane Gallagher Silverstein, for inviting Z to be the keynote speaker for this year's birthday celebration. What an honor. Helene Biandutti-Hofer is the former host of WXXI's longtime television talk show, Need to Know, and continues to work with WXXI on special programs. In 2015, she founded HBH Enterprises Media Group, where she consults as a journalist, filmmaker, media trainer. She's currently working with the Solutions Journalism Network, encouraging the practice of evidence-based reporting. Helene is also the owner of Papa and Pokey Productions, a division of HBH Enterprises that produces short films and multimedia content for change makers, taking on social issues in their part of the world. Helene is currently the manager of Complicating the Narratives, an initiative of the Solutions Journalism Network. Helene was not a classmate of Norm and Z's, but she did study at American University as a journalism student for 2 years before transferring to Columbia University. As it happens, her first job out of college was also for CBS in Columbus, Ohio. Her connection to Norm and Z, and Helene worked with Z at CBS News in New York just before coming to WXXI in Rochester. And maybe we'll hear the story about what happened when Helene applied for her job at WXXI WXXI. Helen, thank you for being with us tonight. Susan B. Anthony actually was a journalist. She understood that two things could make the world better: getting everyone the vote in our democracy, and also assuring that we had access to a free and independent press that could provide the information we needed to be good citizens and to elect a sound government. Clearly, what was important in Susan B. Anthony's century is just as important to us today. I am very thrilled to welcome our very special guests and you, our special guests, to this intimate conversation as we invite these three people to tell us a little bit and let us listen in on the conversations as they share together. So I think, Norm, I'm going to hand it off to you to get things started.
Well, I guess I shouldn't keep people waiting. I'm sure that Helen remembers this very well. She applied for a position at WXXI, and when we were hiring news people, I always like to take a look at the resumes, and little do I know that Helen was working for Susan Zarinski, and she had no idea that I knew you, Susan, which made it even more interesting. But when I called you on her reference check, you picked up the phone. You didn't even slow. You just said, "So you're taking my best person." And that really saved me a lot of time after that in terms of having any other reference.
It was a short narrative for us, right?
Right. But that was, I've actually never had that experience before, and it was well-deserved. So thank you so much. You trained her really well, and I still miss her anchoring some of our programs, but we always work to do something together. So that was great. When we were undergraduates at AU, it was really a different world. No one had ever heard of Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and there were just three major networks. And at that time, you had to be a male to occupy one of those chairs. I don't think Barbara Walters even got her shot on air until 76 of graduates by that time. And things were so different. We actually scheduled our dinners around which network newscasts that we like to watch, and that's when I was a kid. So, of course, an obvious question is, what's really changed since then? And is it too simple to just talk about, say, social media and streaming, or is there something that's fundamentally changed in the way we view journalism today?
I just want to get in one tiny story before I answer the mega question. I just want people to know that Helen, when she got out of school, came to CBS, came to apply for a job. And I was very impressed with her because extremely sort of confident. And then I got the backstory that when she was 11, she heard CBS correspondent Erin Moriarty give a speech at her school. She was 11. Am I correct if I'm remembering the age?
Yeah.
And she walked up to Erin Moriarty, CBS News correspondent, after the speech, and she said, "I'm going to be you. I want to be you. I want to work at CBS News." And from 11 till she graduated college, she kept in touch. In those days, it wasn't called stalking, although it might be stalking.
Aaron might say it was stalking, right?
It might be stalking today. However, she maintained that connection. So when Helen, and I knew that about Helen, and I was kind of enamored, but I didn't have a job. And it doesn't matter how much you want to hire somebody, and especially in today's world, if you don't have the money or the head count, you can't hire that person. Yeah. So months go by, and I get an opening. And I call Helen, and I said, "Knock, knock, I have an opening." I don't think 2 days went by before she was standing at my desk. And it was an entry-level job, but she embraced it. She made it much more than it was, and the rest is history. So I'll give you a couple of Helen stories as we go. But to go back to your question of what really has changed, everything and nothing. And by that, I mean, The technology right now is so unbelievable that so many more people can be informed. But it behooves us as the major networks to take part in any platform. We can't just be a network on linear, which we're not. We are now a 24/7 streaming operation with cbsnews.com. As I like to say, download the free app. It's programmed into me. I have to say that. But you know, a great digital audience doesn't transfer to linear numbers. So I'm not expecting, if I have something amazing on our cbsnews.com or CBSN, our streaming network, that's going to bring me a viewer, because it's not. I've stopped having that imaginary dream. But what it means is, and what journalism is today, is if you have content, if you have unique content, if you are journalists that are, as I like to say, without a point of view, you are presenting an audience with a straight ahead broadcast. We want to be on every platform. I want to be wherever you are, on whatever device you're at. I want to be your habit. So inhabiting as many places. Our digital side is on 22 platforms. Apple, Roku, you know, our linear is also on our digital. So I can watch the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell at 10 o'clock on CBSN, our free downloadable app. I'm only going to say it once more and then I'm done. It's 3 times as the charm. What hasn't changed is the central core of who we are. We're journalists. We are ferreting out the truth. We're separating fact from fiction. We are operating in a world where, and this is not just President Donald Trump, where candidates no longer needed the media because of the social networking, because of Facebook and Twitter. They could go directly to those voters. And so our job is really to give context and perspective to what people, politicians, the world is saying. So it is, what hasn't changed? Democracy can't exist without a free press. What hasn't changed? Your moral compass. What hasn't changed? Being a good writer, content. What hasn't changed is being distinctive in what you are reporting. What do you have that no one else has? Because the reality is we have a cacophony of information, just floating past us. What do you grab onto? What do you look at? What social media grabs you? What piece will you click through 10 times to find the conspiracy? It is overwhelming. But what I think will happen over the next decade is a Darwinian survival of the fittest, that those who are giving the most thorough, honest, absolute, just real life, real-time journalism will survive. We are in an era where point of view is sought after. We are going to maintain our position of being down the middle of the road. We have to, no matter who attacks us, no matter what people say, we have to tune out the noise. Don't take the bait. And why are we in a press conference? We're there for the American people to ask the most important questions. I'll stop talking now.
Well, I was actually really glad to hear you say that, because what I tell our people in the newsroom is, I say I was taught the way the old CBS people, the people who invented this broadcast journalism would have covered things, which was exactly like you said. Like, you don't bring your opinion with you. And I still remember being scolded more than once by Ed Bliss doing a newscast back in college where I might have expressed an opinion. And people today don't think anything of that. And I also agree with you that people want to get to know now who the reporters are, who the journalists are. I went to hear the publisher of the New York Times speak a couple of years ago, and he reached to his jacket and he said, people want to feel the cloth. And I wasn't so sure that I liked that. What do you think, Helene? Do you think that we're heading more in that direction?
Into the direction of
People
getting
people wanting to know more about who you are as a journalist, as they listen to you actually trying to report the news.
well, yeah, and I think that gets to the first question that you asked, just in terms of this social media and the influx of it, and the access is everywhere, and that's what Z was saying. We are flooded. It's like whiplash, practically, when you think about it, with the way the information is coming towards us, and that's such a hard thing. Because I do not like Twitter. I just don't like it. I don't like to tweet. If I use Twitter, it is only to share something about a news story. I want nothing personal, but I see so much of the personal on Twitter journalists. And if that's what works for them and their news outlet is fine with that, and, by all means, go for it. I'm just think about it in a different way. And I think about how different social media platforms can be used differently. So Twitter for me is just, this is where straight news. Instagram is a totally different. Say it again.
Flow. It's information flow.
Yes, exactly. And then I think about Instagram, and okay, so you will see my dog, in addition to a story that I'm working on, in addition to maybe, something that I made for dinner, maybe not, but something along those lines. And it's hard. It's a tricky thing to navigate, because we're just, even when I was, in J school, I do want to correct, I went to NYU and not Columbia. So I just want to make sure no one, no, facts matter.
No fake news here. No fake news.
Exactly. It was NYU. And I don't remember that. I just don't ever remember, if I saw someone from television, from news, from the Columbus Dispatch. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I just only knew them to be a journalist, not that personal. And it's shifted dramatically. And I don't know how I feel about that. It's an uncomfortable place to be, I think, to give too much of yourself and to want to know too much about the person reporting the news for you. I think you need to have some ability to disconnect from that in order to do the job justice. Yeah,
I want to jump into what Helene was saying, because, when you are on a specific channel or cable or internet site that has a point of view, you're going to know the person because you know their point of view. But there's something very interesting that happened, when George Floyd's death happened in 8 minutes and 46 seconds before our very eyes. And the world was just stunned and cracked open, and it really gave birth to this systemic racism gone on way too long. Our correspondents of color who began reporting on it kind of veered into the personal side, and normally we don't report about ourselves. That's not what this is about. But it took something that was personal and related it to the audience, so that it had a better penetration of the impact of the story. Yeah. So when I heard Michelle Miller report about something that had happened in her family, or Jerika Duncan, it had a power to it, because they had experienced it and could report from a point of view of experience. And we dealt a lot with that. Where does personal stop? In this case, I thought it was very helpful in telling the racial schism that we all knew where it was happening. But it took George Floyd, it took Breonna Taylor, it took Ahmaud Arbery. This was like a perfect storm. And I actually think the Me Too movement empowered the Black Lives Matter movement to a greater extent. And so with our correspondents of color, it was relatable to people, whether you were black or white, because you knew this reporter to be a straight ahead person. I crossed that line at that point. And I am not sorry for it.
I saw that piece that you're talking about too with Michelle, and it was I absolutely. I think in the context of that, especially, I think that helps to, we're talking about, you said context and perspective. That is so necessary. And that enables, that's exactly what audiences need, communities need to see to help them to wrap their heads around this and make sense of it in a different kind of a way. So absolutely. Yeah.
And we've had 2 incidents in Rochester, which is
just like the 9-year-old. I mean, how did that happen?
How you need to handcuff and pepper spray a 9-year-old girl, I will never understand. And this followed not that long ago the death of Daniel Prude, who had a bag placed over his head and ended up suffocating and dying a week later. And still, we have another incident like that in Rochester. And it affects all of us. And we're now working as an organization to become an anti-racist organization. And we're working with our board, with our staff, and this is not going to be a project. It's not going to be a process. It's going to be the way we do business. Everything's got to change. And so, I'm with you on how you feel when you see something like that. Hard to believe it could happen here. Although, there were riots here in 1964. We had a documentary about it not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago. And when I rewatched it, and to me, nothing had changed. So, to us, what our board members of color said, you're already a leading organization in this community, and you could do more. And that we really, as public media, we actually do have a responsibility to try to bring the community together. And so that's where we're going to be focusing a lot of our attention over the next few months and years.
We have a series that we're doing for BET, which is part of the Viacom family, and we call it Boiling Point, and it's 6 hours, and we take incidents that have happened in history, which we have great archives, but pull it into the present, and it's what were the lessons we learned, and why didn't that incident really dynamically change the course of history? We looked at everything from the 92 riots to Attica to Ferguson to Breonna Taylor. So but we couch it in kind of a modern, obviously the cases are more modern, but it's why didn't the LA riots create a momentum and agents of change? I was interested in when Helen said that one of her projects is about agents of change. We're actually doing a series about that across the company. Who are the change makers? Who are the agents of change? What are they doing in different communities around the country to really try to heal the divide, which I'm not sure can be healed right now. We're in a really interesting place in journalism, and I think you have to really have your feet on the ground and have your moral compass set, because it's too easy to be sucked in to the maw of a point of view. I mean, even covering the White House over the past 4 years, it's very difficult to be at a press conference and be yelled at and called fake news and you don't know what you're talking about. And we had multiple discussions about these things, because what are you there for? You're there for the American people to ask the question that they need answered. Don't take the bait. Don't tweet if the president has tweeted about you. Don't ignore if he calls you fake news or you're not very good at your job. You have to have blinders on and just be focused on having a great backup question, because that's what you need to be sharing with the American people.
Yeah. It's so, I think where we are right now, and I call it this beautiful catastrophe in journalism, because I think it's beautiful because in aspect of, you're starting to see how newsrooms are changing. Norm, you just said, we are becoming an anti-racist news organization. I talk to journalists and I train journalists all over the country every day. And they're thinking how they're pivoting, how they're readjusting, reflecting on the coverage that they've done before. How are they framing certain communities? How are they working to rebuild trust? Thinking back to, why does this historically marginalized community not want to be interviewed by our news organization? So you start to kind of own up to that and figure out what are the mistakes that we've made that we need to correct, and what does that involve, and how do we go about doing that? And so you see and hear journalists that are doing it, like they're doing this work, and it's just so empowering, and just to hear the types of conversations that they're having in their newsrooms. And then it's exactly what Z just said. On the other hand, you also hear the fake news. We're in the point of debating facts, and it's so hard to, I think about this, like, man, if I were that 11-year-old girl in 2021, would I have gone up to Aaron Moore and said, I'm going to do what you do? You know, it's like, my gosh, and it's hard work. And that's why, you know, I think the more that we as journalists can be transparent about our process and explaining what it is that we do and the choices that we make. Why did we choose to interview this person? Why did we take the deep dive on this perspective? Like, the more we can do that, that is so, I think it's critical because, you know, you think about it, the average person has absolutely no idea what we do. They have no idea about the conversations that we're having with our colleagues, with our news directors. They've no clue. And if we can walk them through what that involves, the hard choices that we had to make, why we chose not to give this person a platform because we didn't want to amplify hatred and racism, and we had to make that hard choice to go this route instead, that, I think, in and of itself will get to that place where, Z, you were talking about, you know, when we think about it in the next decade, where will we be? I think we'd be at a place where we become more and more of a trusted source, and our communities become our partners and not just looked at as news consumers. And we collaborate together.
The sourcing project that we're part of, we're actually tracking who we're using as sources. That's part of what's going on in the newsroom now. And that's, again, because if you look at it, we go to the same people. They tend to be older. They tend to be white. They tend to be conservative.
We're all in the same plane. We are all in the same plane. In our racial initiatives, we started what we call a race and culture unit. And the job of that unit, there's a couple of people that work in that unit. They work with each show. What are the stories you're doing? Tell us the tone and the context. Who are you interviewing? You know, there's like this learned behavior. You can even have a person of color who's a broadcast associate, and something breaks and they go to the usual suspects. Well, isn't there a person of color that could be a COVID expert? Well, yes, we actually have this amazing guy at MIT. We're looking at every decision we make through a lens that says, why are you making that decision? Should that piece go on the air? Do you need to context that piece? And our race and culture unit is working with all the broadcasts. It sounds just like what you're doing, Norm, you know, in your newsroom of looking at the sources.
That's just one of the things we're doing. I mean, this is across the whole station. We're doing a lot of listening. That's where it really has to start. Oh, yeah. You know, you brought up something before that I wanted to follow up on, talking fake news. Is that now really going to be part of our vocabulary, or are we ever going to be able to get back to where?
No, that's embedded. That's embedded. Look, I mean, this is going to be a quieter White House, but make no mistake, we're going to hold them accountable for promises made and promises kept. I mean, it's going to be quieter, and I don't think that equals dull. But this White House is facing the same exact tsunami of cataclysmic news that President Trump faced. It will be interesting if it's called up to the Hill to testify on impeachment. I can't wait for that. But I think that we are in an altered state, and we have to settle down a little bit. But the stories are still the stories. The truth is still the truth. And while I think this is a different White House, I don't think you're going to see President Biden coming out with a box of bleach and suggesting that maybe that might help make things better. You know, it was an interesting dilemma. can you use the word liar when you're referring to the president? And because he was lying about certain aspects of things that he knew nothing about. And I felt that the office of the presidency has with it a respect. So while I didn't use the word liar, we said we would do a report and said the facts that the president laid out are simply not true. We interviewed this person, we interviewed these experts. On Norah O'Donnell's first day as anchor, and I thought my last day as president of the CBS News Division, the president was attacking the group of four. Go back to where you came from. And there was a legitimate argument among all of us, people of color, not people of color, that we had to call the president a racist, because that's what that was. And I kind of went back to my office and I was thinking it through, and I actually looked up an Edward R. Murrow speech from the hearings, and I felt that I was not in the president's head, so I couldn't call him a racist. But what I could do is cite that what he said was racist. And I was alone for several days doing that. But it was the right thing to do. What he said was racist. Is he a racist? I couldn't answer that question. But what he said was racist. From the origin of the term to how CBS News handled the McCarthy hearings, it was definitely an interesting exercise. And Nora's first day anchoring evening news, I was like,
well, of course, we follow NPR News, and we really do feel like we try to be very balanced. And I think we've had a really tough time with this. It's when you hear about the big lie, the continuing distortion, and I actually think sometimes, what would Ed Bliss have said if I went on the air and accused someone of
the president of the United States of lying? That's why I felt the office of the president does have a historic significance, but that doesn't mean you don't report the fact. The president said this. Well, the truth is, every person of note of science disputes that is true. I don't know if you caught Margaret Brennan's Face the Nation interview with Dr. Birx.
Yes.
Oh my God. It took your breath away, because she was not insulted. She gave charts that changed by the time that the president brought them out in front of the press room. We asked her, did you ever think of resigning? She said, every single day. Every single day.
Well, unfortunately, there's no solution for this. I mean, I went on the air and just on a typical pledge drive said that we were a place where you didn't get fake news. And I got calls from people who said, I don't even want to hear that term. I don't, it's not true. There's no, fake news. It just makes me feel like we're not being honest. It really threw me. So I try to get that out of my vocabulary, but there's certainly when I listen to our newscasts, I hear people say all the time that the president lied about, and I twinge.
Can't do it. I am uncomfortable with calling a president of the United States a liar. I have no problem saying what he said has been proven not true. Mm-hmm. But I think the semantics do make a difference when you're talking about the office of the presidency.
Yeah.
Well,
what's your prediction on the impeachment?
Oh, unfortunately, I just don't think enough. I don't think enough Republicans will break away to give them the votes they need. And that I've been hearing more and more about. There's the governing Republican Party, and then there's the populist Republican Party that follows Trump. And I think there's still enough populists that he'll escape this again.
Mm-hmm. It was fascinating on January 6th. we were going on the air for the final vote, Electoral College. And I remember saying to Nora O'Donnell, look, I'm estimating, for the final vote, we'll be on about a half hour. 15 hours later, it was like, because you kept thinking, I'm watching it, and I lived in Washington for 20 years. Well, they're not going to get passed. They're just not going to get passed. And then, it was a theater, it was just obscene. And you felt so vulnerable. It wasn't 9/11, but it had a similar vulnerable feel to it.
Yeah, I do recall telling people I felt it was like the most dramatic story I had seen unfold since 9/11. And even first of all, like you, I'd spent a lot of time in Washington, and I had to be at the Capitol a lot when I was a reporter and later when I was at public TV. And when they were breaking through the window
I noticed that.
I thought that looks like Louise Slaughter's office, who was our former congresswoman. She passed away a few years ago. And whenever I visited her in her Capitol office, she always showed me these big windows. And she said, this is where the British rode their horses through in 1814.
Wow.
I've had a couple of people who, know that office who say it really did look like her office. So that to me really was pretty moving.
Bone chilling.
Shook.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that we live in a world where right now, look, the truth is 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. 74 million people. So you can't dismiss them. No. You can't discount how people feel about the government or about the Democratic Party. So I think that we have to listen. You said it before. We have to listen to people. What is it? Because that's a lot of people voting. He didn't win the election, but that's a lot of Americans who feel disenfranchised. And he was providing them with something that they didn't have.
Yeah. Well, and it's a different kind of listening though, right? Like, because we go in, and this is what we talk about a lot, is we go in and we think that we're listening and we ask these questions and we have this idea of exactly what the response will be.
Right.
And it's unnerving, and it's part of what makes our job even that much more difficult, but it is so necessary, is that it's listening to get to a deeper place. Like, what is really, because this is what we talk about at, Trump voters. I can't stand that term. I don't want to hear it. This is a position. These are exactly. And it's what is beyond that. And it's what are the motivations, values, beliefs, what drives them? What are the passions? What are the fears? That's what we miss.
It's interesting because when we were putting together our election group and consultants, I almost hired Sarah Sanders, but I did not. But I did hire Reince Priebus, chief of staff, limited time, fired, but still very close into the administration. And people said, well, why do we need that? Like, well, what's that purpose? And I said, I need to understand the motivation behind actions of the president. Right. And I need to know how the Republican Party is accepting that. That was fascinating, a fascinating time. The people, when I told people I was in conversations with Sanders, it was like, oh my God, you would have thought that I had just shot up the newsroom. But it was interesting to me, and I did ask if she had to sign an NDA. Almost everybody does, but the reality is, I never felt she would be honest. When we talked to Reince, he was counseling the president, but he was honest. He saw the flaws, and he talked about making up for those flaws.
And we didn't talk about this, which is how did we get? I believe strongly it's thousands of newspapers that have closed. I think have really changed the way people get their news. We talk about social media. Why do people even go there? Because they're not reading papers. They're not getting the stories the way we got them. I mean, we used to get up in the morning, have a morning newspaper, and actually in so many cities it still had afternoon newspapers. It hasn't been that long, and now that if you have a newspaper that's more than a couple of pages, that's considered great. Like the Washington Post and the New York Times have only managed to really survive and thrive by becoming national newspapers. We're seeing less and less local reporting, and we feel that's really important for a community.
Well, all things are local, so you can't lose the local reporting angle. Quite frankly, that dovetails into some of our processes because, I moved the show to Washington, the evening news. Mm-hmm. That was a hell of a risk. Trust me, that was a big risk. However, it wasn't that I wanted to become so Washington-centric, but it was that everything that happens there impacts everywhere in the country. So it wasn't that I was ignoring the country. I wanted messaging so that I would know where and how fast and where to go to get reaction and the reality of what's real. I got to tell you something. This is the hardest job I've ever had. I've been in it 2 years right now. There are lots of things happening. There are lots of different directions that the company is going to go in. I think that Viacom, CBS, when CBS was just CBS, we were a universe. But now we're a planet in a solar system. And it's exciting in the sense of it gives us other places to produce. Paramount Plus is going to be tremendous outlet for news and documentaries. And so that's something that really excites me. But I must tell you, you said, can fake news ever be walked back? I don't think so. And it's going to take a long time to rebuild the trust in the media.
Yeah.
The muscle memory is very difficult to erase.
Yeah. And Norm, you asked, how did we get here? Right. And I think part of that is also how I think we have to look at ourselves too and look at the makeup of our newsrooms around the country. And when people don't see themselves reflected in their newsrooms, that's a problem. That connects to the trust issue, that connects to disconnect that exists, and that connects to the looking for other places to feed me what they're not giving me. And it spirals out of control.
Okay, so Helene Bianduti, when she was working as a production associate with a group of friends, because she felt all the news was negative and that they weren't portraying people of color doing positive things. A group of kids within the office that Helene organized would go out every weekend with the CBS cameras. And
I know, I was like, are you going to say that?
and shot stories about people doing things for good. And they had it, they cut it, they had it on I guess it was on an internet site.
We have a website
blog,
for it. Yeah.
Blog.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so proud of it. I was really a sense of pride in taking that subject on and producing it and showing people that we're more than just a drug bust in a project. We're more than just a pickup.
It's just reframing that narrative.
Yes, it's reframing that narrative. That's exactly right.
Yeah, well, I have heard that before, that if I don't see people who look like me, then that doesn't interest me. And I've been over the years to PBS meetings where Maria from Sesame Street came on and said that Sesame Street was the only place that even looked anything like where she grew up. And that was like 20 years ago. And how much has really changed since then?
Well, there is change. There is change. 48% of our on-air talent is of color. 48%.
Well, that is.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
That's huge. And it's also, and I should have rephrased this, it's not people that just look like me too, but diversity of thought. And that's what we're lacking as well.
Diversity of thought. And Norm mentioned that before. It's what our race and culture unit, it's diversity of thought is a perfect, I'm actually going to write that down, because good line. I think we come out of this year battered, but hopeful. Battered because we didn't know enough when we should have about the virus and protecting ourselves and leaning into a vaccine closer. But I do think you can't live on this planet and not be impacted by COVID, economic epidemic, social racism, the death of George Floyd. I mean, you think to yourself, you're anonymous in the world.
A little freeze up.
Yeah. She'll be back.
And then you're not. Half year old. My daddy changed the world.
Z, say that last part one more time. I just want Z to repeat.
Yeah, it froze up for a second. So if you could just repeat what your last few.
Okay, now that's going to be tough. No, when we were doing the George Floyd story and we were looking at all of these different, what changes the world. An interview, and Gayle King did it, and it was with his family, and his little girl, when asked, what's going to make change here, and she said, my daddy's change is going to change the world, and that is what's happening. But you don't want to have happen what happened in LA and in Attica. That's why we're doing, the series is called Boiling Point, and it's going to be on BET. I should have that air date in my head, but I don't. We have to look for the little agents of change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They exist. They're there. They're doing the
exist.
work. They're bringing about change. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, in 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton started a newspaper.
That's right.
I have that in my speech. Don't give it away for tomorrow. No.
Sorry,
I did my homework.
Because they believed in the power of the printed word. And of course, today that would be what? The printed word would be social. It might be. At one time, it would have been what was on TV or what was on one of the cable channels. But clearly, at one time, people did believe what they read, and they had a good reason to believe it. And I was wondering how, we should get back to the Susan B. Anthony house for a few minutes. I was going to ask you what you thought Susan B. Anthony would have said if she had met you and you said, by the way, I'm celebrating my second anniversary as the president of CBS News, the network news production. And, other than her saying, what took you so long?
Well, I think that I always felt empowered in whatever job I was doing. I actually never thought about being a woman, not from day one, except when I did have to, I do have this in my speech, I had to deliver an envelope to Leslie Stahl's desk in the Washington newsroom, and it was a White House envelope. So I'm walking around, I can't find her desk, because she didn't really have a real desk. They were in the hallway, her and a correspondent and Connie Chung. And it was like, they were like these tiny, weeny little desks. And I thought, what the hell? And, obviously I've been hearing about equal rights for women, equal pay. I just wasn't conscious of it. And I saw it that day. And when Walter Cronkite did a special when Nixon was at the end, and they hadn't called on Leslie. Leslie was in the show. And at the end of the show, Walter said, well, Leslie, can you fill us in on the gossip? Leslie had broken more stories than anybody. So I think Susan B. Anthony would look at today and not say it's about time, but just say, keep on keeping on. And you know how volatile these jobs are. And believe me, I know how volatile these jobs are. But I came, I conquered, and I'm still at my desk, at least today.
Well, what did Gayle King say? That you were a badass?
Yeah.
So
yes, she is. But what I have to say is she's the most humble badass. I mean, this is like the most humble person I know, and the most generous person that I know as well.
I'm definitely generous because I have passion for people. Like, you know, CBS is in such bad shape financially. Like, I buy cupcakes for CBS. I pay for it myself. I send champagne to people and I pay for it by myself. You know, I do think I'm humble because I know I'm never the smartest person in the room. And I feel that every day I meet somebody or have a conversation, I draft off of them. I draft things intellectually off of them. I'm always smarter for having spent time with someone and listening.
Yeah.
Deborah, I see you've joined us. Do you have?
I have, and that's actually you've all answered a question that one of our audience members sent in, and it takes kind of back to the personal for you, and the question is what you were saying, Z, about how has the career of journalism changed you as a person?
Whoa, that is a very tough question. I went through, you know, it was all work for me, all work. I mean, you know, I was literally living in the dorms and staking out the Attorney General of the United States behind the Jefferson Hotel. So excited. He was meeting with Cubans, you know, here was the Attorney General. And I go back to my dorm room on Saturday night where everybody was kind of feeling a little nauseous. And I was regaling with like, what an opportunity to literally watch history. The camera crews that had to stay with me on Saturday night said, I don't know who you pissed off, but you did a damn good job, because I was going to garages looking for what was the essential big leaker deep throat to the Washington Post. And, you know, every Saturday night I'd hit like another garage. I knew every garage in a 50-mile radius of DC. But it was all about work. And I didn't get married till late. And when I couldn't have a child on my own and we adopted a 10-month-old from China, as she grew up, and I'm still all work, and my husband's commuting from Miami, it was all about work. And I don't really have a social life, but I was like, we would, in those days, like I would set up my computer and I would be next to her on her computer and she'd be doing homework and I'd still be in the office. But she did suffer from a pretty severe depression, and I questioned everything. I did question everything in my career of, did I give too much? And I'll never know the answer, whether that was the reason that she suffers from depression. It could have just been the way her brain is wired. But I did go through a period where I thought I gave too much. And it's difficult. It's difficult for me, even in this new job, to leave the office, because there's always something else you can do, especially in these jobs. If I was a bank teller, I'd probably be counting the money all night long. It's just been my DNA. But I do think that as a journalist, balance is important. Family, I was a better journalist after I adopted Zoe. My husband and I adopted Zoe, because I saw the world differently and I had a wider perspective of people. And I think, you know, not everybody has to get married, not everybody has to have a baby, but having a balanced life allows you to see the world. And you are a better journalist if you have a bigger palette from within which to draw intellectually.
Well, being a journalist.
Can I just say real quick, I'm sorry, as you were responding, Z, I get this text message that flashes across my screen from Mom, and she said, "That was my question."
Oh, Mom!
Exclamation!
So what's your answer, Helen?
Helen's mom used to bring books for Zoe. So Helen's mom is a teacher's teacher, a woman who never stopped learning, a brave woman, a woman who broke barriers. And I have such respect for Helen's mom. And That's probably why Helene turned out the way she did, because of her mom and her dad. And I love her brother too. So.
But being a journalist
Sorry,
worked out for me because I was assigned to cover Maryland state politics, and I met my wife in the press room in the State House. And
my kind of meeting, Norm. I met Joe in the newsroom.
Right, and but you know who else was covering the state government at that time was Glenn Eiffel, and we became friends. And
wow,
you know,
wow.
I know, it was really incredible. So that was a great experience for me. But there are times, even all those years back, that I sometimes feel I got out of it too soon. You know, I used to believe in Joe DiMaggio's "When the legs go, it's time to quit playing baseball," and I kind of felt that maybe a little sooner than I should have, because it's the one thing I still miss. I've been a press secretary. I've been CEO of a pretty large operation for upstate, at least for upstate New York. But there are times I really miss, you know, when there's a big story going on. One of our reporters who used to work here said, "You're the old firehouse horse. You hear the fire bell going off, and you try to get up and run down to the fire." And I really do feel that way at times.
Yeah, you run into the fire. You're not running away from it.
Right.
Hey, that's in your DNA. If that's in your DNA, you never lose it.
Yeah, I think if you ask my wife, when people say, what does Norm do? She always says he's a journalist first.
Always a journalist.
And I'm proud to say that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Deborah, you got another couple of questions? We have a few more minutes.
I think Helene hasn't answered her mother's question yet.
Norm, you forgot me. So I'm going to call you out.
Go for it.
You know, I know it's made me curious. I always thought that I was curious about people, but it's made me even more so, in particular people that I traditionally was afraid of, people that I was troubled by. I talk about this. I wrote a piece about this recently, just how it's changed the way that I just think about our neighbors, my neighbors, you know, the people that I come into contact with. So it's impacted me just in my life more than I imagined. I thought that they were two separate hats that you wore. You are a journalist, and then you are this person that does these other things. And it just merged, and it made me realize that I had closed myself off to being curious about certain kinds of people. And that has totally shifted and changed. And sometimes probably to a fault. I probably ask questions that I shouldn't ask of people that I shouldn't ask these questions of. But I love it. You know, it's been a great change.
Also, but I think partly is because you have melded several different disciplines, which kind of is an enlightening way to be what you are, and gives you a greater appreciation and questioning of people. You know, I do think that the multiple layers of you are really dynamic. And you know, I can remember when you went to Africa to do the story, and I remember looking at the raw material and thinking, wow, like just wow. And how that must have opened your eyes, because you'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah. That was for South Sudan for WXXI. And I remember calling you when I said, and saying, I need to, what do I do? This is like so much bigger than I'd imagined. Help. And you talked me through it, and just get to the personal, listen, spend time with people, and have fun.
Well, you know, I don't think there were too many other people working for a medium-sized station in upstate New York who would have been able to have made a case to go over to Sudan to do some reporting for a few. And I think right after you came back, wasn't there a major battle or something? A coup, something like that.
That we missed on the eastern part of the country. Yeah, so we weren't affected by it, but yeah.
Hey, have you ever said no to Helene? I'm just curious about that.
Let me tell you something, Z. When we hired Helene, after we hired her to be host of All Things Considered, our afternoon radio flagship show, is it she said, "Oh, by the way, I don't own a radio"?
I'm so glad that you brought that up because yes, I did. I said that in the interview and it was almost as though like the lettuce fell out of people's mouths that we were eating. It was a lunch interview. And I was like, I live in New York City. I listen to my iPod. But yes, I remember that. But I do want to say, Z, you asked Norm if he's ever said no to me. And I want to share this because I remember, I will never forget when I took over Need to Know. And I had this meeting in Norm's office and it was like, okay, this is what's going to happen with the show. These are the plans. This is, this is how it's going to roll out. Cause it was just a different format, different set, different way of doing it. And Norm was just looking at me during the meeting. And I remember I was just thinking like, oh gosh, is this like not going to
blow this? Right.
And he says, is this what you want? And I just loved that question. He said, is this what you want? Is this what you want for the show?
Wow.
And I was like, I haven't asked that yet. Norm, I think so. And he said, well, it can shift and change, but okay, let me know if anything changes. So I always appreciated that.
Well, thanks. I never heard that before. I'm glad I was able to give you that opportunity. See, we need more, like Z. I mean, the good managers all come out of journalism. Like in my industry, people always say that the CEOs come out of raising money and, maybe out of engineering, but I always feel the best managers are the ones who have been news directors or have been journalists. So I guess we can maybe start wrapping it up to that.
I was going to,
maybe either of you before we go away, any last thoughts, both Z and Helene?
I think we are living in the most unusual times, but everybody always says that. But you have to evolve, and you can never let the technology overtake the journalism. The technology gives you vehicles of dispatching, of sharing, of proliferation of what the news is, but you always come back to the same thing: facts, truth, perspective, context, and I believe in it so deeply. And no matter what anybody calls you, in whatever language, you are a seeker of truth.
I have the responsibility to close us, but the party doesn't stop because we're celebrating Susan B. Anthony's birthday next week at 7 p.m. from 7 to 7:30 on Channel 8 WROC, or live streamed on Rochester First, so you get to hear more from Z. I was thinking about Susan B. Anthony was talking with the press near the end of her life, and she was saying that we would never see the press reflect what women needed or believed in until we had women in the position of power, controlling management. And certainly that applies to everything we've been talking about, that we will never see a press that understands the people of this nation until it reflects this nation. And I commend all of you for the work that you're doing. And I also think that we know that the press is also about the people who bring the stories to us, and how grateful we are tonight to have the three of you, your ethics and your character, and the work that you have been doing to bring us the news, to tell stories, to give us the why, and to keep us engaged. Anthony lived through terrible times. Yes, the why.
That's our whole commercial. That is our whole sell in our advertising. It's this is why.
Yes.
That is exactly what we promote.
Yep. And I think it's that combination that Anthony had: the reality, which can be horrific, and then the hope and human nature, which can be so incredibly inspiring, hopeful. And so thank you for this incredible opportunity for us and for our audience.
Honored.
We are grateful. Thank you, Norm, for making it happen. Helene for being a part of this as well. And Z, what a great experience for us. And we look forward to hearing from you next week on Wednesday night.
Awesome. Let me sign off with a few words from a letter from George Washington to Alexander Hamilton. My wife Jane found these this afternoon as we were talking about what we'd be doing tonight. It goes like this: "Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story. But we do have control, and you do a great job of it. Yeah, and it's been an honor to work with both of you, at least a little bit over the years. And I learned a lot tonight. Thank you for sharing some of that, Helene. That was terrific. I always just had a lot of trust in you. And I miss you. So
Thanks.
I'm sure we'll have a chance to work together again.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Z. You were terrific.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honored to be asked.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Bye, Z.